KUAM News Hotspot is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
Howdy everyone, and welcome to The Hub. I'm Nestor Lecanto. Our guest this week is a familiar face here on The Hub, Simon Sanchez, who is a longtime board member of the CCU, the Consolidated Commission on Utilities.
The elected
CCU. Consolidated Commission on Utilities. And we're here to talk about a couple of topics that have resurfaced or surfaced. One of them, of course, is a bill by Senator Parkinson to abolish the CCU as it's currently existed and referred it back to
an appointed board,
what it was before, and also the load shedding situation, which was kind of the catalyst, I think, for him submitting this bill. So let's start with that. Your reaction, first of all, to Senator Parkinson's bill to basically abolish the current CCU.
Well, you know, I think as not only Senator Parkinson, but the legislature will look at this issue. Remember, it was the legislature that 22 years ago said the appointed board was not working at GWA or GPA. In fact, at the time, there were two boards. So Speaker Mark Forbes, who was the author of the legislation, said, you know what, there's no greater form of accountability than to be elected by the people of Guam. And so he said, let's try an elected board as governance. And we are now in our 21st year as an elected board. I was elected at the same time the elected Attorney General was first elected. So the Attorney General went from being appointed to elected. The CCU went from being appointed to being elected, you know, and appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature, right? And so the policy issue to me before the legislature is, was GWA and GPA better when it was run by an appointed board, governor and legislative appointed and confirmed, or was it better from an elected board? And I think from every measurement, if you're willing to look honestly at the performance and the outcomes, most importantly the outcomes, by every measurement, it is very good that we have elected representatives of ratepayers rather than appointed. And the first issue of evidence to me was when we got elected, I received a call from Fred Black at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He said, US EPA wants to put GWA in receivership because GWA fails to meet the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. For those of us that remember, we were having boil water notices. We were having, our water was not safe to drink. That was the violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. The other major violation was we were pumping about 10 million gallons a day of raw sewage, untreated raw sewage. The phrase hanam taki was created then, right? We were pumping 10 million gallons a day into our ocean. US EPA said this is completely unacceptable. They sued the government of Guam, they sued GWA, and they called me up and said, we're going to put you in receivership. I said, why don't you work with the elected board, the new governance, and we'll do what we have to do? Because at the end of the day, I refuse to believe that the people of Guam couldn't run their own water and wastewater system and couldn't run a power system. I mean, we take pride in self-government, we take pride in who we are, and we can't even run those two entities with an appointed board. And so I said, work with us, and we came up with a stipulated order. And the stipulated order, which I'll share with you and you can look at later, but there's about 40 things in this stipulated order that said you need to do this because these are the 40 things that GWA had not done under the appointed board. And as a result, over the last 20 years, we spent $1 billion in actual infrastructure construction and implementation and operating today, $1 billion over the next 20 years to correct what should have been done in the 40 years by an appointed board we did in 20 years. And one of the things we did is we told the judge, Francis Tydinko Gatewood, can we spread it out a little bit? Because, you know, $1 billion for this small community is a big chunk of change. We can't do it in 10 years. In fact, US EPA wanted it in 10 years, and we said that's going to price water beyond the reach of people. You can't do that. And the judge agreed. So it became a 20-year consent decree. And we're on the last 1 yard of the last item. The last water tank is being repaired. There's a new plant in Agate, wastewater treatment plant, $71 million. That wasn't there 21 years ago, but that's there to end hanam taki. The Department of Defense, they've built their own school system. Right? They do their own water, which they've done for years. They built their own school system. They run their own hospital. But when it came to wastewater, The CCU negotiated with the Marines and said, look, you're going to make a major impact up north to this community with the construction of Camp Blas and the expansion of our military presence. And I said, this is sort of like a system development charge. You know, when you build a house or a building now, you have to contribute to the future capacity. That's sort of the logic of a system development charge. So I told the Marines, you got to pay for the impact of your buildup. And they said, okay. The Japanese wanted a separate power plant for the Marine base and a separate wastewater plant. And I said, our wastewater plant is 1 mile away from Camp Blas. Why don't we work together and you fix our wastewater plant? And the Department of Defense agreed. And the Department of Defense put in $170 million into the Northern Wastewater Treatment Plant, the largest plant on Guam. It serves 60% of the wastewater we create, all right? They put it in at no cost to ratepayers. Now, I can't recall, and you've been around for a while, Nestor, can you recall any appointed board ever convincing the Department of Defense to hand the people of Guam $170 million instead of building their own school, having their own hospital? I can't. Yeah. But the elected commission, knowing that that was in the best interest of the ratepayers, said, DOD, you're creating an impact. We're going to fight on behalf of our ratepayers. You need to pay for this. And we convinced them, and they agreed.
Let me just interject here. I understand your argument is that, you know, an elected board has
proven to be far more effective.
Yeah, but why couldn't an appointed board do the same thing?
I don't know. But I know what we inherited as the elected board. I was there. I don't know why 40 years of appointed board failed to do what they were supposed to do. But I have this this court order, this consent decree, the lawsuit that led when they sued GovGuam and GWA, saying you're not in compliance. You are polluting the oceans and you're threatening the drinking water quality. You need to fix it. Now, why the appointed boards of 40 years didn't do it, I don't know. But we were going to lose our water system. And so we agreed, renegotiated. And one of the signatories to the consent decree was Attorney General Doug Moreland, because he had moved from an appointed AG to an elected AG, just like we went from an appointed board to an elected board. He agreed with the U.S. federal government that the appointed board had failed to do their job and had put the community at risk. Water wasn't safe to drink and raw sewage going into our oceans. Even he signed off on this thing. So, and that's what we did as an elected body. We said we will make the water safe to drink, we will stop sending hanamtaki into the oceans, and we will begin to fix the system. And 21 years later, we're down to like one more water tank to fix. Otherwise, we've done all the other projects. It cost $1 billion, and we got 1/3 of it, about $350 million was pursued. We got grants for U.S. federal grants. So the people of Guam, but the people of Guam had to pay for the other $650 million. That's why the water rates are higher today than they were 20 years ago. But the results are we have tangible assets in the ground protecting our water and protecting our ocean. And we are in compliance. Now, US EPA has just handed us the rest of the list. The list, we said, can you delay it a little bit? Because there's more to do with the distribution system, right? And we're now going to work on that new list. But as I always predicted, we're probably going to spend about $1.5 billion to fix everything. Now, how do you get $1.5 billion out of this small community with the low incomes that we have? You spread it out over 30 or 35 years. And that's what we've been doing. We've completed the first 20, the first billion. We're working on the next $500 million, and that should take us for another decade so we can keep water rates as affordable as possible while still making sure our water's safe to drink and we're not sending hanamtaki into the ocean.
Why do you think Senator Parkinson came up with this bill? I think one of the things that he mentions is returning the power over the water system and the power system back to the governor, where it apparently, based on what he thinks, that's her organic act authority.
No court has ruled, okay, that's a good question. No court has ruled that the CCU is inorganic. And the irony is, even Doug Moreland signed this consent decree saying GWA and the CCU shall perform the actions required under this consent decree. He never raised that the CCU was inorganic at the time he signed off. So I'm not quite sure why Senator Parkinson or A.G. Moreland now is raising an issue. We know A.G. Moreland has raised this issue in other matters in which he interpreted the Organic Act, and he was ruled to be incorrect by the court. The latest one was when he tried to argue that the airport authority couldn't hire its own attorney. The Superior Court said he was wrong. He appealed it to the Supreme Court. They said he was wrong. So just because an attorney says I have an opinion doesn't mean that means it's the law or that it's correct. Only a court can do that. And there's no court that has ever ruled that we've been inorganic. And if he's so sure that we're inorganic, why doesn't he just go to court? I think instead he's sort of taken an inexperienced senator like Senator Parkinson and suckered him into introducing legislation where he says, I'm doing it because we're inorganic. Well, if we're not inorganic, then why are you doing it? Well, then that says, well, then maybe you're doing it because you want to improve governance, right? Okay, let's talk about governance. Let's talk about the utilities before the board was elected by the ratepayers and after. And when you look at it, this consent decree has been completed. Yes, we've had to make difficult decisions, challenging decisions. We've had to raise $1 billion, and we've had to raise rates, but we've also got a third of it donated, grants. GPA was a mess when we stepped into there. We were elected in November. Pongsona hits December 8th. We didn't take office till January 3rd. The appointed board of directors of GPA never met after Pong San Hwa. They just abandoned ship. They left it during Pong San Hwa. And when we walked in on January 3rd with John Beneventi and Ken Flores, there was no money, no bucket trucks, no inventory, no cash. That's what the appointed board left for the elected CCU to deal with in the middle of a typhoon recovery.
In those days, was the intent of the legislature in creating an elected board to remove politics from it, or what was the rationale for that?
I wasn't in the legislature at the time.
It seems counterintuitive that you want to remove politics, so you
have them elected,
yeah.
Right? But having said that,
yeah.
the most accountable system in a democracy is to elect your representatives, right? And by having our representatives for the utilities, their presence on the board diluted by a governor's appointment and a legislature's confirmation, that dilutes the direct selection by the people. And then there was the reality. GWA was the dumping ground for hundreds of political hires for decades, all right? And we got in there, and you're required to have certified operators to run the wastewater plants, right, and the water systems, right? They have to be trained and certified to meet US EPA standards. It's the standard, right? When we took office, we had 3. Today, we have 100. You cannot work for GWA today on those systems unless you can become certified. So we invested in training our employees, getting them better pay when we worked with Senator Klitsky and Senator Brown for the certified technical professional law that pays them better. And today we have 100 certified operators that we didn't have 20 years ago. I don't know why you would want to go back to the day you didn't have certified operators, and US EPA won't let you go. And the bottom line is US EPA in the last 20 years has never said, hey, you're not doing a good job, we're going to put you in receivership. The trash has been in receivership. Department of Education had a internal receiver for federal funds. The hospital has an appointed board. And the school board, 8 of the 12 seats are appointed. How are we doing in all those projects, whereas the CCU has actually built $1 billion in projects? They're still debating where to put the hospital. Ukudu is under construction. We are having solar farms being built.
Well, you focus a lot of your comments on GWA. I want to get to GPA because I think that's your problem child right now.
Yeah, it's our problem child.
We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more of our discussion with Simon Sanchez of the CCU. Please don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. We're talking with Simon Sanchez of the CCU, talking about Senator Parkinson's bill to abolish the elected CCU and revert it back to the appointed CCU. And Simon, of course, in the first half of our show, was talking about all the reasons why we should continue as we have been. And you made a good case about how successful you've been with the GWA.
There's that old saying, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And right now, Senator Parkinson and Attorney General Doug Moreland want to repeat the history that failed our people 21 years ago and led to consent decrees for both power and water. So let's talk about power.
Yeah, there's also a saying, Si, that what have you done for me lately? And I think one of the things that people are most concerned about right now is the load shedding situation. And you and I were both around when we first had the load shedding way back when Senator Parkinson's dad was a senator.
Causing some challenges, yes.
Talk about load shedding these days and how we've arrived back at this situation.
Okay. Well, the one thing that Senator Parkinson, Attorney General Moylan, myself, and about 150,000 other people agree upon is load shedding. Load shedding sucks. It is. We hate it. Nobody likes it. Nobody's happy about it. But how did we get here? You know, sometimes, as we know in life, things happen beyond your control. And so you work on what you can control. And sometimes if the good Lord sends you a curveball, you got to deal with that too. So in 2013, I believe, something like that, Cabras 3 and 4 blew up, all right? An industrial accident. 80 megawatts left the grid. Now, by 2008, we had already started planning to replace Cabras 1, 2, 3, and 4. We expected them to need to be replaced by 2020. We started the planning process. And we worked with Senator Pangilinan and Speaker Pangilinan at the time to develop a renewable energy plan, right, which is still being implemented. And we started the process of replacing Cabras 1, 2, 3, and 4 with a much more fuel-efficient generator, because the technology has matured so much in the last 40 or 50 years. And even though Cabras you could nurse it along for another 10 or 20 years, the new technology does the most important thing when it comes to power. The only way you're going to lower the power bill for the people of Guam is to reduce the amount of oil that we burn for the energy that our people need. And the Ukudu generator is going to reduce the amount of energy we use by 500,000 barrels of oil a year. The solar farms, the renewable energy bids that we're putting out, so far it's only been solar, so that's my expectation. Although someone could look at small nuclear, I'd love to look at that bid, right? But the expectation is that we'll get solar. But the key is you're not burning fuel. So if the new generator and the solar farms that are being bid out now, we're going to go from 2.8 million barrels a year to 1.4 million barrels a year. We're going to reduce the amount of oil by 50%. 2/3 of your bill is the LEAC, is fuel. We're going to cut that in half. We're going to cut that 66% portion of your bill to around 30%. The LEAC has ranged from 23 to 32 cents in the last 3 to 4 years. It's going to go down to 14 cents when Ukudu is turned on. When the additional renewable projects that are being bid out now come online by 2027, 2028, the 14 cents will go down even lower. Yeah. So that's how we lower the power bill.
Yeah, and there's no question, I think, that everyone would agree that Ukudu would probably be the salvation of the current load shedding situation.
I hope so.
But the question is, why wasn't it built sooner? Why didn't you said you
sure.
respond with the then Speaker Pangilinan as far back as 2008, 15 years ago. Why?
Well, that was the renewable energy plan, but the integrated resource plan, which we update on a regular basis, by 2013 we started working on the new generator to be in line by 2020, right? And so, but when you put out a bid for generation, first off, we have to figure out what we want. That takes some time. You put out the bid. Bidders have to take time to what do they want, organize it, figure out the financing, then they turn in the bid, and then you got to evaluate that. So there is an analysis time necessary to figure out who is the lowest bidder, lowest competent bidder to build these assets for us, right? But we started the process in 2013, and the plant should have been online by 2020. But then, the Ukudu is being built by KEPCO. In their winning bid, they offered not just the Ukudu facility, they offered about 40 megawatts of movable generation, and we wanted to put it down in PD, right? Where we've had power generators our entire lives. But we ran into opposition from a senator in the legislature, Senator Rangel, who wouldn't approve our ability to put generators down in PD where we've had generators forever. And we kept saying, you need to approve this by March 30th of 20, whatever that year was, because the bidder can't hold his financing. He needs to know, right? And it was delayed. Finally, the rest of the legislature passed it, despite his objections, but they passed it in April, a few weeks late. We lost 40 megawatts at an excellent price because of legislative interference by someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, right? And it was a single senator. At least the rest of the body figured it out. And so those are some of the challenges, appointed or elected, we've run into when people in the legislature that really don't understand the system. In the case of the current Senator Parkinson, he's been in office 11 months. He's got no background in utilities, and now he thinks the answer is to get rid of the elected board. Has he looked at what the appointed board did to GPA and the ratepayers 20 years ago? If he has, I don't know why he's proposing this bill, because by all measurements, the appointed board was a failure. It failed our people. It failed GWA employees, it failed GPA employees, and it failed the ratepayers, the appointed board. The elected board, you don't like us, you can get rid of us. It's kind of like when you don't like a senator, right? You don't say get rid of the institution of the legislature, you just vote for a new senator, because that's the power of the people in the ballot box. The power of the people in the ballot box applies now to the elected CCU. I think some of the people might be saying, hey, there's a couple of other boards that maybe we ought to elect it, because when we leave it through the standard political process, governor appoints, legislature confirms, the results at our hospital, I don't think anybody's happy, right? So with that background, I mean, we struggled to get that. What that did is delayed Ukuru. Ukuru should have been online last year, right? But that delay, and then the permitting process, we went to Washington. Then COVID shuts down US EPA for almost a year. You couldn't get any permits out of US EPA. So COVID delayed the permitting of a otherwise approved plan. Then they finally started construction.
I got to cut you off here because we got to take another break. But when we come back, we'll talk about that was then, this is now, how we get out of the current load shedding. Okay, take another quick break. Be back with Simon Sanchez of the CCU right after this. Welcome back, everyone. Final couple of minutes with Simon Sanchez of the CCU. Okay, Simon, you talked a little bit about what caused the delay in Ukuru, and we're still a couple of years away from that, as I understand it, but we've got the load shedding issues right now. How do we deal with that? Can we bring in some temporary to fill in that? Can you explain?
So John Beneventi has, before the CCU and the PUC, a plan that will bring another 80 megawatts of capacity online by May. Right? Some of it, and so that's the plan. When we bring that 80 megawatts of capacity, it's kind of like having Cabbage 3 and 4 back online. But we've been delayed by procurement protests for 25 megawatts for the GEGO generator that was damaged by Marwar, and it's the thing where we've had to send the part off to Texas and get it back. But that was damaged, but we can't fix it because of a protest. So Senator Parkinson has actually helped us with a proposal. Well, okay, we don't always have to agree, but he's helping us there. And then finally, Senator Perez, I believe, took a bill that we had all submitted in February. Finally, I think it was on the floor. So I'm hoping actually both bills will improve procurement. If either one of those bills had existed 7 months ago, the GEGO combustion turbine would be being repaired now instead of being protested. So I think that's going to fix us for the long time. But 25 megs from the GEGO CT. We've already approved, and he's getting PUC approval to go procure 40 megawatts of additional generation, a mix of 1 and 5 megawatt generator. So that'll take us another 65 megs. And then he's doing some repairs to the generators we have on island for another 15 or 16 megs. So he has a plan submitted to the PUC, submitted to the CUC, approved by us already, to purchase about 80 megawatts of power that will replace some of the generators that have been aging for 20 or 30 years. We bought backup generators 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Well, now they're 30 years old. They're old. So they're being replaced. But he'll bring on 80 megs by May, and that will continue. As we put those online, it'll continue to reduce the incidence of load shedding to the point that I believe that once the 80 megs are on by May, we will eliminate load shedding. Load shedding for 19 of the last 20 years had really been something of the past. I think that's why everybody got frustrated and disappointed. Yeah. So we had really ended load shedding, but events beyond our control delayed the new one. A typhoon knocks out 25 megs. There's nothing, whether you're appointed or elected, there's nothing anyone could have done about that. The question now is, what do you do given those obstacles? And John Beneventi and the CCU have approved a plan to bring 80 megs online by May to reduce, slowly continue to reduce, and then eliminate load shedding.
All right, Si, we're out of time, but thank you for coming in. I always appreciate you know, even when the heat's on, you're here and you make yourself available, and we really appreciate that, and I think the public does as well.
Well, when I get frustrated, I always remind myself, hey, you volunteered. So I'm happy to serve the people of Guam. There is no greater privilege than to be elected by the people of Guam to serve them and stand before them. And that's why I still believe you should elect the CCU.
All right, Simon Sanchez, Director of the Consolidated Commission on Utilities. Thank you for joining us, Si. I'm Nestor DeCanto. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you again next week on The Hub.